Morning. How about we light some candles? Hope you're doing well, and welcome to the Wednesday Pastor Check-In with Pastor Brian. That's me. It's a joy to have you with us on this Wednesday morning. We are continuing through our reading of 5 Marks of a Methodist. Now, if you really wanted a copy of this kind of small book, you can still get some outside of the office store. Starting today, the offices are going to be open and staffed 9 to noon. Now, we still prefer that you call ahead or email ahead just so we can plan for you. We're still observing COVID-19 protocols. But these books are outside the office door, so you don't even need to come inside. You just come inside the building, right outside the office door. We've got a few of these left from a time when we did another book study on this book, if you'd like one. But you don't need one because you can follow along as I kind of take us through these 5 Marks of a Methodist. This book's by Steve Harper. It's a book a few years old, but it's based on a tract that John Wesley wrote back in the 1700s, the founder of Methodism, on the character of a Methodist. And so Steve Harper has kind of modernized it for us. And last week we talked about how a Methodist loves God. And we talked about how that's really kind of a way of saying that we are filled with God's love so that we might share it with one another and where that love comes from. And so this week, the second character is that a Methodist rejoices in God. And I love this one because it reminds us of kind of the holistic nature of what our faith is to mean. You know, when we talk about rejoicing, a lot of times we talk about that word on celebratory days, of course. Days where we celebrate joy. The word in the middle of rejoicing, joy. So on Christmas Day or on Easter, there's lots of rejoicing and hallelujahs on Easter morning. But it's really one of those words that I think encapsulates something we're supposed to have during the whole of our faith. And here's how we can start to get at that. The guiding verse for this chapter is from Nehemiah 8, verse 10. Don't be sad, because the joy from the Lord is your strength. Again, we have a reminder that the love we share and the joy now that we share is the Lord's joy. And in so doing, we're a reflection of that joy. I think sometimes when we think about joy, we also think about happiness. But even then, we have a little bit misconstrued what that means. You know, some translations of the Beatitudes, are you familiar with that? In Matthew, blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the brokenhearted, on and on and on. Really, some translations translate that as happy are the meek. And I think if we use our traditional notions of happiness, we might be confused as to what that means. But the writer, Steve Harper, draws us towards this understanding of happiness, of blessedness, of joy, of rejoicing, to be really about an understanding of God's righteousness at work in you. Rejoice in the Lord always. I say again, rejoice. I have preached those words on happy, high holy days, but I have also preached those words in the valley of the shadow of death at a funeral. What does it mean to rejoice in the Lord always? Now, if it means the kind of happiness that we mean, when we, get a nice present for our birthday or for Christmas, or, we're excited for one moment. That kind of happiness is fleeting, and we know that and we experience that because I'm sure there's been times when you were so happy and then something happened and it didn't last long. The kind of joy and rejoicing that we're talking about is a steadfast joy of the Lord that is present in our life. And really, it's about the Lord's joy being our strength. And we rejoice as a sign of our strength in the Lord. And so to be happy with God, as John Wesley puts it, it's more of a classical understanding of knowing who you are in God's presence. And so thus rejoicing is a reflection of your calling to be who you are in God's sight. And I think above all else, it talks about assurance. We are assured of God's love in our presence. And we might take to a familiar Charles Wesley hymn and his conviction of this set to music. Rejoice, the Lord is King, your Lord and King adore. Mortals give thanks and sing and triumph evermore. Lift up your heart, lift up your voice, rejoice again, I say, rejoice. So I would encourage us as we continue to reflect on these characters to understand God as the originator of these things. And so when we say a Methodist loves God, we're saying we're a reflection of God's love. When we say a Methodist rejoices, we're really saying we are participating in God's joy. God takes joy in us. God takes joy in creation. And we get to be a part of that story. Perhaps my favorite congregational refrain is when we say, "This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it." What would it look like for us to wake up every morning and say that? And I think there's some power in saying that even on the days when we don't feel it necessarily. To say, I am going to rejoice today. I am going to be a reflection of God, of the joy that God takes in me, in my life, in the people in my life, even in those whom I might call enemy. God rejoices. That's not to say that God rejoices in everything we do, but God rejoices in the fact that God created us in God's image and called us good. In us, God is both pleased and desiring to make us better. When we rejoice, we sing God's praises that we might be drawn closer to them. And so, friends, as we consider what it might look like to be joyful, to rejoice, and to be someone who rejoices in God and one another, consider God's rejoicing in us. I'll leave that for you there today. I do wonder how you're reacting to some of these things, some of these characters, some of these marks of a Methodist. I'll go ahead and give you a preview of next week. It's about a Methodist gives thanks. And what I love about all of these, I will just say, is that these are all things, I think I mentioned this last week, these are all things you could say, well, of course you would do that. A Christian would do that. A Baptist would do that. A Presbyterian gives thanks and loves God and is rejoicing. But there's a particular way that we think as Methodists. And I think sometimes we forget that there are particular ways that we read Scripture as Methodists, that we understand grace and how that impacts how we live our lives and how we understand faith. And so I hope you understand that this is kind of just a way of taking us through the Methodist understanding of thinking and experiencing, and not just this is what only Methodists do. Because, of course, we know as a part of the Church Universal, we are one church under a Christ who serves all of us. All right, enough talking. Let us know that you're here and accounted for. If you have any questions or thoughts or things you were wondering about in relation to this material or anything about Methodist theology or Christian theology, I'm leaving it wide open for you, but let us know. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. See you later.